Want to see another camera comparison on the slanted lens? Then stay tuned while these two knuckleheads fight it out.
If you're going to grow in your business, you've got to get some help. You've got to get help from mentors and people who can help you grow. I can do that for you. Go to theslantlens.com, sign up for our business material. It'll help change your life. You can sit and think about business, or you can do something about it, and it's time to do it. Hi, this is JP Morgan.
And this is Kenneth Merrill.
And it's time for another camera review here on the Slanted Lens.
We're going to compare raw stills from the Red Epic W 8K to the Sony A7RII.
Pull stills from the footage compared to the stills we shoot on the A7R II.
And why am I here?
This is Louise Houghton. She's our wonderful model, beautiful lady who's going to help us look good. So let's get started and see what we can do. Okay, we're back here at the Slanted Lens, ready to look at the findings that we got from that Red A7R II comparison.
Yeah, I am super excited for this. It's kind of a nerdy test, but I've been wanting to do it for a long time because Red's always claimed their cameras are built for stills as well as video. And so the question is, like, how viable, I mean, aside from the price and all of that,
aside from
how viable
that
is it to
thing.
just use the camera as a stills camera?
So the idea is, though, that you can shoot video and you can pull frames and you get a raw frame from the Red camera. So how does that compare from a raw to a raw frame on the A7R II? So let's look at let's do the ISO test.
Yeah,
Start
so
with that.
we did an ISO test kind of like we do with a lot of the cameras. And the first thing you're going to notice off the bat is the Red is darker. Notice, I'd say about a stop darker.
Yeah.
And I've heard that before. I didn't I didn't want to push it around too much, but I've heard a lot of people say the ISO on Reds is darker than it is on a lot of other cameras.
Well, that doesn't mean the ISO is darker. It means the ISO is like miscalculated.
The ISO is miscalculated. In fact, I think in the new firmware they're coming out with, they're actually changing it to be more accurate to what everyone else is.
Because we did a meter reading off from a gray card, a spot meter reading off from an 18% gray card. So you're getting a meter reading that we set the cameras at. This should be. It should give you straight up and accurate.
And the exposure here is the same. It's same apertures, same shutter speeds, same everything. So it really is just the ISO is miscalculated on the
Where
Red.
the color is very different too. On
that is also the first thing I noticed too, is the color is a little more teal.
Well, the image we shot had teal. We put a cyan gel on the fill light, and that fill light's filling in her shadows, and it's throwing some cyan onto that background. Cyan, not Cheyenne. Cyan onto the background.
It does look like she has a little more magenta in her skin tone, though, too. Which
yes, it does. You're right.
On this one, it's a little more neutral on the Sony. But anyways, so the ISO, I mean, I'd say the most interesting things we're going to start seeing are maybe at 800 ISO. If you punch in here, honestly,
it's pretty darn clean.
I can't see any
it's very
noise
clean.
on the A7R II.
Very clean, 800. That's interesting to me. I wouldn't have expected to see that on the. I thought the Sony would be starting to show more grain at that point.
1600.
1600, yeah.
Punch in again. You start to see a little bit of texture in the shadow areas or around her face and the background and stuff like that. The key side is still super clean. The Red, it's also really clean. Again, but it's kind of hard to tell because I feel like this whole image should be boosted to stop.
Yeah, I do too.
To bring it into acceptability.
Really see it.
But I do also have to say the Red image is softer.
It's a little softer.
And the megapixels, like the resolution on these cameras is pretty similar. I think the Sony is like 10 or 41, 40, and the Red is 36 megapixels, but the Red is noticeably softer.
Yeah. Well, it's a smaller sensor size, too.
It's a smaller sensor size. And it could be the Red's famous for having like really strong low-pass filters to get rid of any aliasing or anything like that, and so that kind of tends to soften the actual image.
Which for video makes a lot of sense. It just gives you that kind of dreamy film look, you know?
Right, takes some of the edge off.
Doesn't feel quite so video, but when we go to 3200,
the A7R II, I mean, it looks good to my eye. I don't know how this would print. You definitely start to see like the
You see it in the background. You see it in her hairline here on the top where the shadows start to build. You see that kind of, you just start seeing that building up. Let's see what it looks like on the Red. Whoa, wow.
The red, you definitely start to see color, a lot of chroma noise.
Chroma noise, especially in the background, has just more of a grain pattern to it.
Yeah.
In the background on the red versus the A7R2, and that's at 3200.
The other thing that happens too with the red, and once you get up to the 64, is it shifts. The
color
shifts
just shifted,
crazy.
whereas the Sony has not done that. The Sony's been pretty consistent.
So low light, I mean, I think obviously the Sony A7R2 wins.
Oh, absolutely, hands down.
For a cinema camera, I don't think the helium is much to laugh at. I mean, 3200 looked pretty good.
Yeah.
And it's not bad, but if you're going to shoot stills, I think I would go with the Sony for low light.
Good idea. No, definitely. I mean, ISO-wise, the Sonys hold up. They really do.
Yeah. All right, dynamic range test.
This test is always confusing to me a little bit. So, but no, I processed
it's
the.
It's confusing to everybody. I'm the only person that understands this test.
Okay, well, at least you
Which
do.
means maybe I'm just crazy.
It's not that crazy man, Kenneth.
Kenneth and his crazy ISO or crazy dynamic range tests. So we did this one really simple, just over a couple stops, under a couple stops. We didn't want to get too much into it. So when we did the dynamic range test, we actually had to do it twice. Because the first time we did it kind of with a more contrasty image, and we, for some reason, shot both cameras at ISO 800 because the Red's native ISO is 800, but the Sony obviously isn't.
Well, that's what we were set up light-wise. It was just easy to do the A7R2 and the Sony. Then we realized the Sony is not a native. Yeah, it's going to lose out in that deal because. But with the light we had, we were only able to go back to 250 ISO, so it still isn't ideal for the Sony. We're still over the native ISO by a stop and a half. But
I would say it's more fair than it would have been.
Yeah, absolutely, much more. So, but looking at it was very clean. The A7R2 is very clean,
over 2 stops, under 2 stops, both look great to me.
Easy to pull them back when I'm in RAW. It was very easy to get them to correct. There's a little bit of color shift in both those, a little bit, but not terrible.
It did fall apart kind of when you pushed it too hard with the overexposure.
4 stops, I couldn't recover it. It just, the highlights are gone.
Yeah.
And you get this the skin on her face just is overdone. And
but what that tells me is, if you're going to shoot with the Sony, then you want to protect the highlights because we saw from the ISO test and stuff, it does really well with shadows.
Yeah.
I think you can push it pretty hard. So if you kind of protect those reflections, protect the highlights on the face or whatever, then you can push it up what you need to in post.
The reality is, and that's what I always, go ahead, the red.
The reality is just properly expose
Well, the reality is, if 2 stops is pretty darn forgiving. That's a 4-stop range. You can hit something, which is pretty amazing.
Absolutely.
Outside of that, you've really missed it.
Yeah. And the point of this isn't to show like, it doesn't matter what you expose for.
No.
It's just trying to say, that window, if that window's in the shot, it's not going to be recoverable, or it will be. That's what we want to know. So. We go to the red here. Of course, the image again is a little underexposed to my eye, but
a little bit.
This is a native ISO test for the red. It's
800
ISO. At -2 stops, bringing it back was no problem. Again, it's a little dark. Over 2 stops looks fine, and this was surprising me. Over 4 stops looked fabulous, totally flawless.
That's amazing because that's 4 stops. You have no problem.
I bet you could probably even maybe go up to 5.
I think you're right.
So, a little different. It seems like with the red, you want to feed it more light.
Yeah.
If you're going to be shooting at 800 ISO or higher, definitely give it more light because it's easier to pull. I think it'll be easier to pull back the highlights than it will be to push the shadows.
Yep.
But of course, just expose properly.
Of course.
All right. So, of course, the big difference here is that one is a cinema camera and the other is a stills camera. The point for me is why would I use the red to shoot stills?
That was the point of the test was, is there an advantage to running video and being able to pull these raw stills from the video? Is there an advantage?
Yeah, and I think there is. If you're shooting a video, if you're shooting a commercial or something like that, the ability to pull like a full resolution still frame from that is awesome. But you do run into challenges. And that's
major challenges.
Because when you shoot video, you shoot at 1/48th or 1/50th of a second, which is not really enough to freeze any. It's not acceptable for a still image. It's usually too soft. So we took some images. We had the model just kind of posing and moving around. This is when she actually paused for a second and stood still, and you can still see a little bit of motion blur in her face. Mm-hmm. And around her dress and stuff. Anything that's moving is going to blur.
Well, I mean, even people fidgeting at a 50th of a second,
And
you know, if she's leaning forward, if she's twisting at all, you know, you're going to start to lose it at a 50th of a second.
I mean, this shot, I really like this shot, and it would have worked if we'd shot at a 1,000th of a second, her running her hands through her hair, but with this, it just turns into a blur.
Just mush.
So we did a test. We didn't have too much light in the room, but we did a test where we did exposures for 1/400th, and that definitely helps. Like here, she's swinging her jacket, and it kind of freezes most stuff. She's throwing it over her shoulder, and it freezes it pretty well. Her watch is blurry. You know, some of her hair is a little bit blurry because it's moving.
Well, that's because she's fairly still, and she's throwing her hand. You know, and so her body and her face are staying pretty still.
Really, to get a still image, you need to shoot at least, I'd say, 1,000th to really, if they're moving like this.
If you want to freeze them. If you want to freeze them. So it doesn't really work. If you're doing something fashion where the person's really moving around, it just doesn't work. At that point, you just turn your video camera into a still camera because you've got to jump up to a 1,000th of a second shutter.
And you can't, the video at that shutter speed is going to look weird.
Yeah, oh yeah, you can't use the video. And so now you got to have a ton of light, and I mean, my sense of this is, why not just go to a strobe that is going to have a very short flash duration and is going to freeze your action. And you can shoot as fast as, you can shoot 8 to 10 frames a second easily on some strobe platforms. So,
and that's another thing too, is you, at 1,000th of a second on a cinema camera, I mean, you need a lot of light, and because it has a rolling shutter, you can't use strobes.
No.
So you have to have, you're gonna have to have 4Ks or 10Ks on your set to get you enough light to shoot that. So, I don't know. I guess I have heard of people doing this. I have heard of people bringing a red into the studio and setting up huge continuous lights and shooting fashion, and they'll shoot 30 frames a second. I actually watched a video the other day where a guy talked about how he loved it because, he can be shooting his subject and he has it on a pre-record. He has a 30-second buffer on his camera. So he'll just stand there, and when something happens that he likes, he just hits record, and it'll capture everything from the last 30 seconds. And then, of course, until he stops. I guess there's a cool workflow. If you're the kind of person that wants the exact right moment,
well, you certainly have that option.
You have
because
that
option. You can look at each frame. And
24 of those per second, so that makes sense. But I don't know. Personally, I think it's a lot of trouble.
It's a lot of trouble, I think. And I think you can get strobes are going to give you something pretty darn close to that. Pretty darn close.
And based on what we've seen from the other tests, the ISO and the dynamic range and stuff, I don't know that there's like a huge advantage of the sensor itself over, your Sonys or your Nikons or your Canons.
So if we put these things, raw images, side by side at 50th of a second, where's...
How do they compare?
How do they compare?
In general.
In general, yeah. Because this video, you're pulling raw image, you're looking at raw image off from a still camera. How do those two compare?
I mean, I think, obviously, like we said before, the red is much less sharp overall.
It is.
Probably because of the low-pass filter. It could have been the lens. We did have a 35 on mine, 45 on yours. They were a different lens, but both Tamrons, both probably very similar.
Both Tamrons, both same generation, so they've got to be pretty similar.
I'm not surprised the Sony's sharper, honestly.
Me either.
Because just the way that those sensors are designed is much more stills friendly. Whereas I think it's okay to have a little bit of softer image with cinema. I actually prefer it. Other differences, I personally really like the tonality of the red. I mean, they both look nice. I like some of the, it feels like they're a little bit stronger colors in the red. You could bring that, I mean, of course it's raw, you can bring out whatever you want. You could change the background and make it pink, but...
The latitude's so incredible. But yeah, I think you're right. I think the Sony has a tendency to be a little greenish.
Yeah, a
little
greenish.
bit. Which is not necessarily bad. More neutral, whereas others have more of a reddish tint to them, or magenta.
Honestly, at this point, you're looking at two raw images from two great cameras. It comes down to what's your flavor,
Yeah. Well, my sense of it is that you use a still camera to shoot stills and you use a video camera to shoot video.
I think that's definitely the conclusion here.
The thing you can do both those from the same camera, same setup, I think is crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, I have however, and you and I have worked on a lot of stuff together, it's like I've started shooting light a whole lot more with continuous light than strobes, even though I may switch back and forth.
Right,
you know,
right,
because it's just, or I do this, I love this, I just pop in a strobe light just to give me a little bit of a highlight and use the continuous light that's there, and that's just kind of a compromise. It's an easy setup, quick turnover to change up to a still setup without lighting everything, but using the continuous light that's there. So.
And it is nice to be able to pull frames from your footage, you know, rather than shooting on like a 2K camera, which you can't, those frames can't be blown up very big, you know.
Yeah.
Sometimes clients want stuff to put on their website or print and put in the wall. It is nice.
I think if you're going to have a situation, you always need to shoot stills on everything you do, even if you're doing video. And if you don't have a still camera, then shoot video like stills. Get the person to just stop, look at the camera, smile.
Get a good thumbnail.
Now you can pull images from that, and you'll be able to use that as a thumbnail,
absolutely.
and that makes a huge difference.
Well, this was interesting.
It was interesting. I thought it was fun. Yeah.
Well,
so there you go. Keep those cameras rolling. Keep on clicking. Oh, I did the whole thing. So this
why did you do that?
I don't know.
Steal my
so
thunder.
used to it. Don't estimate alone. Don't stand out in the cold all by yourself. Try to put together an estimate? Go to theslanted.com/estimating. I've got a digital download that will teach you everything you need to know. You don't have to be alone any longer. Subscribe to the Slanted Lens, like all my buddies here did. You can come and hang out with us. We have a wild time together, me and my buddies here, my Dominican buddies. We have a great time together, so come and join the Slanted Lens. Subscribe. You can be friends with us too.